Finance and Philanthropy track. This track has been a result of collaboration of 5 different partners: Asha Impact, the Britspan Group, Educate Girls, Waterfield Advisors, and Dalberg. The first session is titled Funding the Dream, Creativity and Innovations in Fundraising. The session is structured to capture insights from eminent leaders from different social sector organizations who will be sharing their perspectives on various innovations in fundraising, in retail, HNI, institutional, and CSR. Understand the challenges, the costs involved in fundraising, and enhance knowledge in innovative fundraising tools and practices, the do's and don'ts of fundraising, the key focus on organizational resilience. I now invite the moderator of the session, Ms. Aditi Jha. Aditi is the Senior Manager at the Fundraising and Partnerships Vertical at ISDM. Over to you, Aditi.
Thanks, Mariam. Good morning, everyone. We're so excited to have you all here to join us for this amazing session on creativity and innovation in fundraising. Just want to start by saying that raising funds in the social sector is as crucial as it is in any other sector for sustainability, expansion, and independence. But it's more nuanced. Gets complicated for several reasons we're all well aware of. And as the end result is not financial returns, but it's social returns, which is multifaceted and takes time to manifest. It's also not just about getting your mission or organization funded, but it's also about transformational journeys for all stakeholders, sustained and satisfying collaborations, and creating communities for your cause, that is, friend raising. Plus, the ever-changing regulations that add more complexity to raising funds and utilizing funds. And so, innovation and creativity in fundraising are crucial for staying relevant, engaging with the donors, addressing the evolving challenges of nonprofits. By embracing new ideas, approaches, technologies, nonprofits can not only raise funds more effectively, but also create spaces and models for effective collaboration, autonomy, and greater impact. Raising funds in the social sector has never been easy. But today, there's an even greater need and opportunity for creativity and innovation to boost fundraising efforts. And so, as we know, there are 4 main segments or channels of fundraising. Retail funders, who are individuals giving smaller amounts, but in large numbers, could be over longer periods. Institutional fundraisings, or funds raised through foundations, mostly set up by individuals, philanthropists, and governments. Corporates, mainly through CSR. High net worth individuals, ultra high net individuals, or your major donors. So while there are some universal principles to successfully raise funds for organizations, like effective branding and diversification of your funding portfolio, the approach and strategy and the need for innovation within these 4 major segments differ and are guided by distinct principles and motivations. For example, what would motivate an HNI to give might not motivate a corporate. And with more regulated and more professionally emerging social sector, we need solutions that suit this fast-changing landscape. And so we have an absolutely star panel coming with great experience from each segment to give us insights into some of the crucial aspects: context, trends, innovations, challenges, learnings, and the costs within these segments. So first we'll hear all the speakers and open the floor for a few quick questions. You'll also have the opportunity to interact with them post the session. So now, with the tone setting out of the way, would like to call Anant to please share his views on retail fundraising. You can speak.
Thank you. Sharing with in terms of how it is so important. One, besides the point that it is the fastest growing, the retail segment. Uh, but for a running program like ours, let's say Akshay Patra, uh, this also provides you the required flexibility. Almost, it is to some extent within the program boundaries, quite unrestricted. uh, it is a run rate kind of a business. You have very clear cash flows which you can see. Yeah? Unlike other fundraising engines which come on the corporate side, which have their own skews. Here, I think leaving a month or so, it is almost quite flat. So provides the right kind of a buffer. Uh, Needless to mention, it definitely wide bases. And I think most importantly, plugs in the gaps which you need in programs where you don't have some other funding sources coming, or there is a good amount of a bias towards a geography or a particular slot into it. So that's where is our kind of a focus, and I think for all other organizations which run these kind of regular programs, I think this engine becomes quite vital in the complete portfolio. Uh, we do close to 30% of our total fundraising through this engine, of which again broken up into you can say go to market of online, offline, brought two compartments. Online contributing to 20%. Offline, I would mean would be some telesales and some near the communities where we work, feet on street, or you can call it whatever. You can call it whatever. The ticket sizes, if I were to say, is X in online. It would be 2X in telemarketing, telesales, I would say, very, very aided, and 10X in the direct side of it. Uh, if you were to look at some kind of, from a lens of new and existing uh, givers, uh, 1.5 times existing givers than new. Uh, but the acquisition focus continues because the lifetime value of a giver at a retainability of 60 to 65% is almost 5x. Is 5x. And I think that's kind of also decides which channel you pick up, how much do you invest there. ROIs, for example, let's say on Meta and Google, are at pure, since we also have a large existing base. So sometimes it gets clouded. It looks very neat as 1:6. But if you look at pure new acquisitions, it remains at 1:3. 1:3. Uh, the I if one had to look at uh, some other trends which come through very clearly, yeah, in terms of which channel to use where, which again, I think geographies are also deciding for us. For example, international geographies are now contributing 10 odd percent, with these US, UAE, Singapore, Australia remaining in the top 4 5 at 2 times the average ticket size what an Indian giver gives. The retainability of 90% as against a 50 to 60%, 50 to 60%. So those are few trends which are very clearly coming out. The needless to mention, the age of the giver has dramatically fallen in the last 4 years by as much as 5 to 6, 5 to 6 years, 5 to 6 years. Insta, which never used to be a channel to be targeted, is now a channel which is a favorite channel, which is being targeted by our online fundraising team. Then the direct marketing team, or which one would say the fundraising through feet on street, that works only if you were in the communities where you are, where you're very, very closely working. Otherwise, it is a very, very expensive channel, and very, very expensive channel. But yes, in our context, where we have the kitchens, where we have the schools, where we are serving, there it is a very, very positive rub-off. It almost is like adopting and the ticket sizes are also very, very high, very, very high. So that's where it is then, since one also has the corporate base through CSR, which engages on volunteering and other things, these channels also get into cross-sell, yeah, with the employees of those organizations. And that I think comes at absolutely different ratios of everything. So for example, an organization which has volunteered with us, and a burst of email to a targeted segment there has an hit ratio of as high as 50 to 60%, 50 to 60%, as against a 2% ratio at other places. And other channels which we've used on the, you can say the content delivery channels like Tabola and, kind of audiences through PayU, ATM. I think early days, but as pure, one would say, a kind of an ROI, I would not kind of, at this stage. First of all, I'm not conclusive about it. And maybe as a direct ROI channels, they're possibly not there. But yes, in terms of the brand reach and outreach, they are absolutely kind of very, very potent. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Anant, for sharing the trends, the evolving social media landscape, and cross-sectional importance of individual fundraising. Moving on to Sriram, could you please share your views and insights into institutional fundraising? Thanks.
I just feel far more comfortable standing. It's a little weird. Little bit of background on where I'm coming from, because I think over the last couple of decades, since the time that I have understood fundraising and built a certain point of view, I just would like to call out that most of what I've learned is very practitioner-led. So from a practitioner's lens of what has worked, what has not worked in the world of institutional fundraising. But before I get into that and productively use the next 10 minutes, a quick show of hands. How many of you come from non-profit organizations which are less than 10 years old? Quick show of hands. Okay. Between 10 to 20 years? Okay. Rest, should I assume, are 20 years plus? Safe assumption. Okay. All right. Thanks. I think there are three things that I want to call out. When we say institutional fundraising for the purpose of this conversation, I'm solely restricting myself to fundraising from foundations outside of India, right? So which means the Nilakanis and the Tatas and the Omidyas are not part of this conversation. Over the last many, many years, the trajectory of how foundations look at giving and what is the color of their financial capital and what is the purpose for which they give money for, I think has changed. Right? And a large part of it is because of the introduction of CSR in India, particularly in the last 10 years, the way nonprofits could potentially look at the utility of institutional funding has changed. Prior to the CSR law in India, many nonprofits have a history of utilizing foundation funding for their direct programmatic work. Right? Because there was no CSR, a lot of nonprofits relied on individual donations, which Anant was alluding to, retail giving, HNIs, UHNIs, perhaps in some cases foundations, of course, as a principal contributor. And even though there was not an existence of CSR, but corporates were, out of their own volition, giving money to good work done by nonprofits. But for the most part, the funding from foundation was channeled towards programmatic funding. I strongly believe that given the era that we are in today, with 10 years of evolution of corporate philanthropy through CSR, which Priya will allude to and explain later, but the funding from foundations should be, for the most part, channeled towards organizational capacity building, which is unrestricted funding as many of us understand it to be. Right? And the comfort and the willingness and the generosity of allowing organizations to utilize their funding for unrestricted funding is very much prevalent in the times that we live in. Right? Obviously, when I say unrestricted, they are still aligned to your larger vision of the organization. the programs that are being embarked upon by nonprofits, but the utilization of how the money should be used has enough wiggle room, not many tight boundary conditions, allowing the organizations to use their discretion to use that funding the best way that they deem fit. For the most part, there may be one or two exceptions, but for the most part, that's something that is very, very visible. And we currently work with about 15 such foundations in many interesting ways that allows us to build an organization, make it resilient for the long term. Which means there is corporate funding that we raise for programmatic work that is done by the nudge. Foundation funding is primarily unrestricted in nature, which allows us to make upfront investments for building the organization long term. Upfront investments include investments in people, investments in technology, investments in impact assessments, investments in landscaping a particular opportunity or a problem statement that we want to embark on, investments in marketing, investments in fundraising, and so on and so forth, which are typically, as many of you in this audience would understand, I don't want to preach to the choir, are not funded by funding that comes from CSR, or there are tighter boundary conditions around that. So foundation funding really, really helps build those capacities and capabilities for an institution for the long term. Now, there are three ways that I would like to segment the foundation landscape at the cost of oversimplifying and also in the interest of time. The nonprofits that were less than 10 years old, typically today there are foundations which like to call themselves as venture philanthropists. So examples include your Draper Richard Kaplan Foundation, Mulago Foundation, LGTVP, part of the Big Bang Philanthropy. There are about 14 or 15 organizations which constitute what is called as Big Bang Philanthropy. They share a common value system of how they look at organizations. They share a common investment thesis of how they evaluate organizations. And the beauty is that once 5 of those organizations fund a particular nonprofit, the rest are obligated by design to look at the grantees that were earlier funded by the 5 of them. So that allows you an opportunity to actually reach out to 10 other foundations, which are all part of the same coalition or consortium. So these are what I call as venture philanthropists. Early stage funding for organizations that are typically in the 5 to 10 year mark, or even less than that, less than 10 years. And what does their funding primarily revolve around, or what is the approach or strategy that sort of works is, it's extremely led by the capability of the leadership of the organization. So if you're are there venture capitalists in this room by any chance? I presume not. But the investment thesis is largely led by the founder, the pedigree, the capability, prior demonstrated track record, not necessarily in the social space, but their own vision, the grand vision, the boldness, the audacity of what they're imagining the world to be, the capabilities that they have to back themselves up for the bold and audacious claim, and the clarity around the initial business plan in their formative years, right? There will be a lot of pivots, there will be detours, we will learn, we will fail, we will move on, but the clarity, the most important thing that they seek is, hey, do you know what you're doing? And are you in a position to be able to articulate it in a simple, crisp manner to me? So most of the venture philanthropy organizations, the names that I alluded to, look at that as their investment thesis. And therefore the core central crux or fulcrum of the entire pitch or the fundraising proposal revolves around that, while of course the theory of change, the outputs, all that matter, but this remains the fulcrum. The second category, call it for a lack of a better word, the mezzanine sort of layer. These are foundations which have a lifetime value, which means they are repeat givers for a good 7 to 10 year time frame. They start small, like for example, Mulago Foundation starts with a fellowship that lasts for a couple of years, but they sort of continue to give for 7 to 10 years. LGT Venture Philanthropy, a foundation that is based in Zurich in Switzerland, also follows a very similar model, and there are many others. So these are organizations, what is their fulcrum or what is their core is, once the organization crosses a minimum viable program or product stage, right? Once the organization survives the initial 3 years or 4 years of the entrepreneurial journey, they particularly tend to focus a lot on the scale pathway. And by scale pathway, I mean distribution. Is it distribution through private partnerships? Is it distribution through government? Is it distribution to some other channel? Is there a public-private partnership? How is this program going to scale? And what is the organization's imagination of that scale pathway or pathways in plural? However, it doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be rooted and it is cast in stone. Right? There could be 3 or 4 possibilities that an organization is imagining, and they may be certain leading indicators of scale pathway 1, maybe doing better than 2, maybe doing better than 3, which is all right. But again, the clarity on saying how is this going to scale, and is the organizational infrastructure, which is people, which is clarity on strategy, is that in place or not, is something that they tend to go very deep and question on. They make you think very hard, not necessarily work very hard, right? So there's not a lot of documentation and stuff, but thinking is very hard. Then the next category, the third layer, is obviously the biggies, right? We're talking about the Gates Foundations, the Ford Foundations, the Welcomes, and huge foundations. They tend to really come in and drive this scale pathway by pouring gasoline on it, all right? Whether it is partnerships with the government at real scale, at population scale. And contrary to when I began institutional fundraising, perhaps about 10 years ago, they are also repeat givers, right? So they're not one-time givers, so there is a certain lifetime value which may not happen on an annual basis, but every 2-3 years, they do tend to revisit. Their own strategies also change with time. And as long as the overall mission is in alignment with, they sort of continue to give. Right? The one thing that I want to call out is, unlike, let's say, at the cost of maybe provocative, right? With foundations, the go-to-market, or how do we approach them predominantly outside of India, is among all the categories, whether it's a foundation, corporate, what I've noticed, at least personally, is that there are CSR summits that happen in India, and I'm sure Priya can elaborate more, but I've hardly seen the TCS and Googles and Infosys and CTS of the world attending these CSR summits, right? With large CSR budgets. Unlike that, in foundations who are very, very visible, they attend a lot of these events and making your presence felt in these large convenings. For example, the UNGA assembly is happening right now as we are speaking in the US. They are present, they are visible, they go out there to meet a lot of people, amazing founders. So if you're able to make your presence felt in those communities, in those events, that's one of the ways that has proven to be successful in opening doors top down, right? Otherwise, I do hear a lot of times questions coming in saying that, hey, the website says we don't invite unsolicited proposals. So how do I even get access to these foundations? So one of the good ways is to actually travel, and that again requires upfront investment. I think Aditi and Riya, in your opening remarks, you said creativity, approach, strategy. But I think one important thing that I've realized and really, really value is the resilience of the fundraiser itself is an important contributor. We're talking about building organizational resilience here, but fundraising itself requires an immense amount of resilience, keeping at it for a sustained period of time. And it is also a very important mindset that needs to be cultivated in a very structured and systematic way within an organization. It's a muscle that we build over a period of time, and it is not a magic wand that happens one day and helps us. So with that, I'll probably park for now and maybe invite questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Sriram, for giving the clarity on purpose. And it's not just about proposal writing and institutional fundraising, it's a lot more. Moving on to Priya, if you could please share your insights on CSR.
Okay, let's see this. Does this work? Right? Okay. You're able to hear me, right?
Is it green?
Are you able to hear me at the back? Okay, great. So I just want to, come where Sriram kind of left off. So to get a sense of the room, how many of you think of fundraising as your core job? Show of hands. Okay, how many of you do other things? How many of you do other things and don't believe that fundraising is your core job? How many of you love fundraising? Like love it, love going out and talking to people? How many of you hate fundraising? Okay, and how many of you actually work with CSR today? A lot of you. Okay, so here's a confession. I hate fundraising, right? I despise it, loathe it, just If I ever were to describe my job as a fundraiser, I would kill myself, right? And I'm not being facetious. I'm saying it with all certainty. But every day, on a day-to-day basis, if anyone sees my calendar, I speak to between 8 to 10 different organizations. And the reason I do it, and I find energy and joy in it, because I'm not selling Samhita's goals. I'm not selling somebody else's purpose. I'm selling my purpose, right? So the day you make your organization's goals your own, when you believe the work that you do, when you trust it, when you embrace it, that's the day that fundraising becomes joy, because it's not just about raising money, but it's really about spreading the word about, all of the lives that you change on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's sort of point one. Point two is, and actually maybe a related point. So last year, some of us in the organization said that we want to double incomes of 10 million workers and entrepreneurs. And every single person that we spoke to said, you're mad for so many reasons. When you say income of workers and entrepreneurs, those workers and entrepreneurs don't even know their income. When you say 10 million workers and entrepreneurs, where are you going to get them? And when you say double income, like, what is this audacity that you have to say you can double incomes of people that, otherwise have struggled, right? And so what we did is we said across our organization and across our partners and across our funders to say, do each of you believe in this 10 million vision? And suddenly it wasn't about, Priya or Madhu or somebody in Samhita raising funding for 10 million people. It is the 75 partners that we have who said, these 10 million are our own, and strategies to fundraise for 10 million started coming up. Because the first day we actually said, what is the bare minimum, right, that it takes to double incomes of 10 million people? That's $1 billion. As a sector, do you think we've raised $1 billion? We haven't, right? And so how do I, as this tiny organization, have the ability to say that I will raise it? Suddenly it didn't become about me. Suddenly it became about many different people who used many creative strategies to figure out how do we do it, right? And so today we're well on our way to actually use tens of millions of dollars that we're raising from corporate philanthropy to actually unlock more than $1 billion of corporate, government, and financial institution funding. So really, my first point is make it your purpose. You'll love it more. Make it every individual's purpose, and you'll see many ideas sort of come to the fore. Second, we've now worked with somewhere between 250 to 300 companies, right? And every time I go into a room and talk about CSR fundraising, there's this moans and groans and saying, but, they don't give money. It is so difficult to find them. The proposals take forever. But the two things that I've learned over and over again, which is the reason I love CSR, and very obvious, which is they have to spend the money, right? Unlike individual donors who don't really have to open their checkbook, companies have to spend money. And so they are constantly looking for great organizations that they can support. Second, and Aditi and I were just talking about this, which is, our company is writing long-term checks. They're signing short-term contracts, but they are evaluating you for long-term partnerships. Talk to any CSR manager. The nightmare of her life is to onboard one more partner, right? Because the administrative hassle of convincing a whole bunch of stakeholders to actually find one more partner is very difficult. And so if you're already working with CSR, and a lot of you are, really your life is pretty simple. It is about saying, how do I just invest in this relationship and build it over a period of time? My third secret, right, is I no longer think of Samhita's flagships as Samhita's flagships. I basically go and talk to every one of my funder and say, these are your flagships. So Tata Motor Finance loves the work that we do because they're not funding us. They are funding their hundreds of thousands of truck drivers and truck owners. Godrej is not funding us. Godrej is funding their thousands of beauty entrepreneurs that they care about. So as soon as you make your mission, your corporate's mission, they will fundraise for you. I'll give you a really small story. So earlier this year, when we were figuring out, how do we get this catalytic impact, one of my funders, I called her and we came up with this financial instrument. It's a credit guarantee. It's CSR and FCRA compliant. It very simply is about saying a bank usually will not lend to somebody that they consider high risk. Think of your maids and drivers. Why do they borrow from you? Because they can't borrow from a bank, right? but they pay the money back to you. So we now have a mechanism where we are using tiny amounts of CSR money to unlock 200 times the amount of money from banks. And I needed this tiny amount of money from my first funder. And so she went and she convinced everyone in her organization. And there was this one person who, no matter what my funder tried, refused to sort of budge. And so finally, on the last day when they had to make the decision, my funder went to her boss and she said, I'm going to take a mental health day. This is it. This is my project. No one's supporting this, and I'm going to take a mental health day. And within 3 hours, her boss called her back and he said, well, here is a strategy. And they figured it out. Now, if I had to fight that battle, there was no way that I was coming up with this creative solution. But my funder fought that battle within her own organization. And that day, she became the champion. Not my flagship, her flagship. Not my project, her project. Do I ever have to worry now? I don't have to worry. Our funding is coming to an end in September. She's already coming up with multiple creative ways to make sure that they can fund it, right? So for all those of you who are sort of selling your flagships and your projects, make it your funder's flagship, and then you can go to Goa or a spa or wherever it is that you go to relax. The third thing, right? We've now seen a lot of innovations happening in CSR, and I'll talk about a few of them. The first is this thing called blended finance. So 3 years ago, in the middle of COVID, when we wanted to impact 500,000 people and get them back on their feet, we said, but where is the money to do so, right? Very little amounts of money was available. The FCRA regulation was here. PM CARES was here. And, we needed to help a lot of people. And so we came up with something called a returnable grant. It just means that normally you would do skilling and you would do it for free, except we went to people and we said, here's money for skilling. We'll make sure you get a job. But once you get a job, every month, pay a little bit of that money back so somebody else can benefit, right? We tried it for skilling, we tried it for entrepreneurship, we tried it for digital inclusion, financial inclusion. We worked with 27 partners, funded 40,000 people. Now, think of this as the middle of COVID. For the first time, NGOs are going to people who are used to grant funding, and they're saying, please pay the money back if you see value, right? So we thought 5% of people will pay the money back, 10% will pay it back, because they're never used to paying the money back. 40,000 people later, 27 partners later, and these include Pratham, Mentisar, and Mandeshi, and Seva, and many government institutions. What do you think is the return rate? 5%, 10%, right? People have never paid for this before. 94%. It didn't matter who we went to. It didn't matter what we were asking them to pay for. They paid back 94%. Why is this magical for you? Because every year, if you want to train 1,000 people and you have to raise, let's say 1 crore, then you have to raise that 1 crore year after year after year. If 94% of those people pay the money back, you begin the next year with 94 lakhs already in your bank, right? You just have to raise the balance 6 lakhs. And the NGOs love it because it does 2 things. It reduces your fundraising burden significantly. And most importantly, your beneficiary is no longer a beneficiary. They actually become a participant. More importantly, they become a customer, and ideally they become a change agent. So when we did returnable grants, and women after women after women paid the money back, what we also found is that each woman who took the money and paid it back told 6 of her friends, right? And so suddenly, the cost for the NGO to acquire new participants decreased dramatically because just word of mouth, everyone else was bringing their friends to the program. And therefore, we saw insane cost efficiencies, right? Why are we doing credit guarantees? Because like I said, and this is a scheme we will be announcing pretty quickly with SIDBI, and all of this happened in 3 to 4 months. 2.5 crores of CSR funding is unlocking 500 crores of loans to people that banks would never have funded, right? That's a huge catalytic impact for CSR money. So think out of the box, be creative. We will be announcing large-scale partnerships with the government, and doesn't matter which ministry you talk about, MSME, MSDE, WCD, Minority Affairs, everyone has money to support the people that you are serving today. All you need to do is come up with creative strategies, use the CSR funding to build the institutional and the programmatic muscle to then unlock a significant amount of government money. Just two other quick points, right, which I think are important. The second is sort of the use of technology and data. So what we did fairly early on is we said, we are going to track every person that we impact. So today, out of the 500,000 people, everybody is on our system. We know who this person is, age, education, background, everything. Why do we do it? So that we can do many things. One, because I know who this person is. She's a farmer, she's an artisan, she is a homemaker. Now I can target interventions very, very systematically because of the data that I have. The second time I have to go back and skill her, I've already onboarded her, so my cost of delivery is very low, right? When I want to layer on other interventions, I know exactly what she wants now. Does she want credit? Does she want savings? Does she want government schemes? And so tech and data actually really goes a long way. And given that all of the progress that you're seeing in the digital public infrastructure, suddenly, not only are we able to follow each one of our participants over many years, every individual gets many, many, many interventions. NSDC comes in with access to training. SIDB comes in with access to capital and formalization. ONDC comes in with access to market linkages. Common service centers are coming in and layering on social security schemes. What is CSR paying for? CSR is only paying for the acquisition of the customer and a little bit of money that other people are not able to pay for. They are able to pay for tech, they are able to pay for data, they are able to pay for impact, right? And so think of data as creatively as you can, because it goes just a very long way. And the last thing I want to say, and this is something that we're sort of delighted by, right? And I referred to it earlier, which is, do not think of your beneficiaries as beneficiaries. So the first time that we had this conversation internally and we said we want to call them participants, people thought it was a nomenclature change. We're just changing language. We're not. Because we're realizing that every time we go to an individual and we recognize them as active participants, as agents of change, they take something that we give and go a really long way. I'm going to tell you my last story. In the middle of COVID, when we were doing returnable grants, this is the second wave, right? I mean, all of you remember, it was devastating. And if it was devastating for us, I mean, we can't even imagine what happened to the poor. So to all of our partners and all of our participants, we said, don't pay the money back. Don't worry about it. Forget about it. Just do what you do. And we had this one group of women who paid us 103% back. And we just couldn't understand for the life of us what is going on here. And so I called a bunch of these women. And the first woman I called, I said, Radha, what's going on? And she said, Didi, kya bataun? I've lost my job, my husband is at home, my children are at home, I've lost my mother-in-law, the burden of the family is all on me, we just have run through all of our savings. And I said, okay, why did you return the money? You didn't have to give it, it's a returnable grant. And she said, aise kaise? When you gave me the money, I was a recipient. When I paid back the money, I was a donor. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, this is a woman going through the worst moment in her life. And she doesn't think of herself as a beneficiary. She doesn't think of herself as a participant. She thinks of herself as a donor, right? That's the agency that we're seeing. So change the way you see the people that you work with, because they already see themselves differently, right? Don't treat them as, ever silent, ever grateful recipients of support. And it is because of these three things. One, really seeing the people that we serve as being active participants and active champions, because God knows we learn from them every day. All innovations that we have done have come because of the voices from the field. Second, treat your funders as champions, right? They don't want to be silent check writers supporting your programs. They want to own it. They want to live it. They want to grow it. They want to find pride and meaning in your programs. Help them make it their own, and you will never have to raise money ever. And third, really build on these fabulous partnerships that we're seeing all around India. The goals that you have are the nation's goals. They are the nation's priorities. And the number of people who are there to help you. I mean, when we said 10 million people, a lot of our very well-meaning funders and partners and friends took me aside and said, Priya, you're out of your mind. Please don't go and say these things, because God knows you're going to fail spectacularly, right? And I was like, that's fine. I mean, it's my failure. I'm okay to fail. But suddenly, it's not my goal. It's not my failure. All of our partners, and when we went to our partners, we said, can you do 10 million? And they came back to us and said, what are you saying? We can do 50 million. What is this like? small number that you're thinking about, there's power and strength. So build those collaboratives. This is not your journey to walk alone, right? But thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions later on.
Thanks so much, Priya. Quickly moving on to Khursheed for high net worth individuals.
Thank you. When the ISTM first contacted me, I got about, I think over a period of a month, about 15 topics to speak on in a matter of 10 minutes. That enough was to make me nervous, and I decided to write a formal paper so that I could fit in and do justice to the many, many topics tossed at me. I have divided my paper today for all of you into 5 sections. What is funding? How do we find and discover HNIs? Fundraising with HNIs, the approach. Fundraising, challenges and costing. Innovation in fundraising. So let us begin. What is funding? Let us begin by first asking ourselves how precisely we interpret these terms that all of us habitually use: funding, fundraising, and HNIs. For me, the connotations and implications of these words are somewhat restrictive. I have found that this sort of terminology confines us to a sort of transactional modus operandi with our donors, instead of permitting us the opportunity to present the entire gamut of initiatives that are required to be deployed to solve systemic issues, for example, those such as poverty. So could we, should we, evolve from the conventional? You may argue, as Priya said, that this is merely an issue of semantics, but I beg to differ. Terminology is ever paramount, as language shapes the way in which we both think and perceive. If we therefore wish to attract more donors, HNI or otherwise, I would argue that we need to portray a far weightier narrative than we are doing at the moment, language that serves to help us and not to restrict us. So, how do we define and discover HNIs? 4 ways. First, providentially, and therefore one has access to them in the natural course of one's life. Second, aggregator platforms, but how valuable are they? We all know what they are, so I won't, WealthX in the space of HNI space, but there are others, Give India, MyLab, etc. We all know them. So we also know that aggregators are repositories of both exhaustive and valuable data. They provide a single point of contact, they save us money, they provide solutions in varying degrees for different segments. They also aid in building a certain type of model for philanthropy. But it is my belief and experience that platforms can never be an end in themselves. Rather, they are a means to an end. Neither can aggregators ever be a substitute for building personal relationships, discovering the DNA of the donor, establishing a culture, creating and sustaining a way of life. But they are useful tools. Third, read, read, and read. Every journal, periodical, and publication. Pull from these. You will be amazed as to how quickly you build a network, a canvas on which you can paint your own picture and tell your own story. And fourth, forums and gatherings such as these, invaluable, because we cannot underestimate the value of group intelligence and expertise beyond that of just a few people. Fundraising with HNIs, the approach. I mentioned the word personal, but in corporates too, we deal with individuals, we deal with people, not with corporates. So working with HNIs is much more than just that. For me, Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, is my go-to guide. On the subject of persuasion, he emphasizes logos, an appeal to reason, pathos, an appeal to emotion, and ethos, an appeal to credibility and ethics. Ethos must never be compromised. It is non-negotiable. Logos, too, must be ubiquitous, as indeed is the case with pathos. But my experience has taught me that in the HNI space in particular, pathos takes up sizable room. i.e. inspiration and a rich emotional landscape rooted in the narrative with full focus on credibility and rigorous impact reporting. Therefore, pick your people carefully. Meetings must be memorable, never allowing the donor to become emotionally disconnected from the cause. The front line is responsible to take the donor on a journey. Words and images have to be leveraged well. They are powerful triggers, and as E.L. Doctorow, the American novelist, famously said, "The historian will tell you what happened. The novelist will tell you what it felt like." With HNI donors, we have to be able to do both. Stitch together several worlds at the same time. Fundraise from the perspective of an investment, and indeed change the way in which the social landscape is experienced by all its stakeholders. In the end, it is all about picking your people well, assigning the right person for the job, training and development, and empowering them. This is where that infamous word, leadership, comes into play, bandied about everywhere, yet sadly conspicuous by its absence. And the penultimate chapter, fundraising, challenges and costing. The classic question, do we outsource fundraising or manage from within? What about costs? The answer to this, in my humble opinion, is fourfold. A combination of aggregators, professional fundraisers without, dedicated fundraisers from within, and above all, researchers who ask questions all round, not just in our domain. For example, are there any learnings that SPOs can imbibe from relatively small companies raising equity capital for the first time? Why? What do they emphasize and why? And what is plan B in case the initiative is either significantly undersubscribed or oversubscribed? Naturally, as the balance of funding changes, the equation of what we rely on will also change. For me, working from within is always preferable because every brand has a distinctive personality that could and should become a case study to be shared with research organizations. Another classic question, how much should we invest in fundraising and when? My answer is simple. It is impossible to do justice to anyone in our ecosystem without adequate funds and resources right from the start. For the HNI fundraiser, it is an investment of emotional labor if she or he is to change the palate of the donor and attract investment. Hence, they must be paid and paid well. Our costs, just like in all corporates, are necessary overheads critical to our purpose, not fuzz. We provide goods and services infinitely more valuable than soaps and cars. Why then deprioritize SPOs? Is it not time that the thick black demarcating borders and lines between the three sectors, public, private, and social purpose organizations, dissolve entirely to make way for a more fluid, holistic structure? It is 2023, and the need of the hour is to alter the shape of India's poverty pyramids. It is pressing. Therefore, the biggest challenge that I see is educating and enlightening society by way of structured programs, driven and governed by data and research. Why to give, how to give, and who to give to. And this includes to those who work in our sector. We also need to better enable and equip those working for and with us. That includes training in the simplification of collaterals, especially for HNIs. My dad tells me every day what J.R.D. Tata told him. Simplicity with brevity brings clarity. As data banks grow, we also need to learn how to use these findings much more efficiently, but at the same time, how to look beyond them. Statistics are a powerful tool, but they never tell the whole story. In our sector, especially, the sum is greater than the parts, and much more so than in corporates. So we also have to look at the more tacit aspects of management. This is a welcome challenge. And another challenge, businesses are evolving and integrating with ESG and its parameters. The same applies to BRSR, business responsibility and sustainability reports, and aligning themselves with the 17 UN Sustainable Goals. In our sector, we have initiatives like the IFR4 NPO, International Finance Reporting for Non-Profit Organizations. This is just an example. An effort is being made to secure the trust of all our stakeholders, and we have to uphold all these strategies. But I ask, why is corporate India setting trends and direction? Are we not better positioned to do that? Something to think about. And finally, innovation in HNI fundraising. Avoid the herd mentality. Think outside the box. Change nomenclature, change the style, change the experience, and keep all activities in line with the UNSG and ESG patterns. Uncover and discover. For example, look at my own community, the Parsis of India, where HNI philanthropy has been a watchword since time immemorial. So how has HNI funding changed, say since the days of Jamsetji Tata, and why? Could this help us innovate? I have found that it often helps to look back when trying to shape the future. Moving on, having to provide material value in exchange for support, in my opinion, needs to be weeded out entirely from all our sensibilities. For example, 7-star fundraising dinners. Instead, invite HNIs to fireside evenings of storytelling, and that includes by our beneficiaries. Remind me in the break to tell you the story of Raju the elephant and the tiger poacher in the Sundarbans. Invite beneficiaries to think tanks and SPI meets. Ask our HNI partners to create cause-related marketing campaigns and co-brand products so that a portion of their sales are passed on to us. This approach, where the private sector and the third sector join hands, could potentially become ever powerful and bring a much-needed system of checks and balances on governments. Offer the organization of HNIs management training and development programs born out of our lives with SPOs. No MBA textbook can ever teach corporates what we can share with them. Leverage that asset. Today's forum is a visionary endeavor in the words of the organizers themselves. They have asked us to build a transformative journey for development excellence. In that context, if anything I have said makes even so much as a dent in our journey, then I will say it has been worth it. It has been pure privilege dealing with the ISDM, and to have been given this opportunity to address all of you today, even if it meant a journey with a broken leg. So thank you. Thank you for your time, for your patience, and for listening to all of us.
Thanks so much, Khursheed. We'll now open the floor for questions.
Priya, thanks for giving us an insight on the way you've been engaging with the CSR segment. You mentioned that there is a large community that you were able to touch and you have data about them. You also mentioned that one of the key things you did was providing small amounts of money, which came back. On this ambitious goal of touching 10 million lives and trying to double their income, can you give us an insight to the audience? What is the key concern for them right now? Is it just getting that resource and they know what needs to be done? Is it a bit of skilling? Is it to give them guidance to get into new things? If you could just give us a better insight.
That's a great question, right? So doubling income doesn't just happen, like you said. It's not sort of a single intervention, magic trick. So there's many things that we're doing. The first is access to credit. And what we have is a blended finance continuum. Some people need grants. If you're working with sanitation workers, the poorest of the poor, you're not going to give them loans, right? You're going to give them grants. Some people have the ability to take money and pay it back. Particularly when you look at skilling, livelihoods, people do have a source of income and therefore they can pay the money back. Therefore, we have returnable grants. We've also done inter-subsidies, and now we will be announcing a very large scheme to unlock access to credit at affordable rates for the poor. So think of two things. One, ensuring that the person gets the right financial instrument depending on who they are, their context, their aspirations, but they also have the ability to move to the right. Second, every person we work with gets financial literacy, digital literacy, because these are core enablers, right? You're not digitally empowered. I mean, what are you going to do? You're not going to be able to get skilling or market linkages or anything like that, right? The third thing is everyone gets access to savings, investments, and insurance. You need to create a safety net and resilience. Everyone gets access to skilling, and these are different types of skilling. Could be a trade-specific skilling, could be entrepreneurship skilling, depends on, again, who the individual is and what the context is. Everyone gets access to market linkages. The reason we love ONDC is because it is a buy India, for India, with India platform with very, very low rates, right? And meant for the poor. Everyone also gets access to social security. So we are working with the common service centers to say, and actually using, and I know Hagdashak and a bunch of others are using a similar mechanism, that I can walk in and I can say in Gujarati that I'm 40 years old and I'm a woman and I'm an artisan, and through voice-enabled technology, I know exactly what I'm eligible for, my parents are eligible for, my workforce, my children. So the intent to use AI to do a universal discovery and delivery of social security schemes. Over and above that, we're also layering on access to healthcare, family planning, safety and sanitation for women, and then also ensuring that pan-India, we have a network of childcare centers. So it is the combination of many, many, many interventions being delivered by many different partners, NSDC for skilling, ONDC for market linkages, SIDBI for formalization, and credit linkages, banks for loans, which enables us or gives us the confidence to say that we can really double incomes. And in all of this construct, the role of institutional funders, like Sriram said, is for building the institution, right? For investing in the technology, the data, the partnerships, which will fuel this. Corporates are saying, hey, we will take responsibility for our own. Like I said, Tata Motor Finance is saying, well, we know truck drivers, we'll support them. And L&T could potentially say, but we understand construction workers and contractors. And so also partnering with companies, and Khursheed talked a little bit about that, which is each of these organizations know their audience very, very well, right? When Arvind talks about apparel workers, they know what they're talking about, and you can then, impact 1 million apparel workers. When, let's say, banks talk about business correspondents, they know what they're talking about. They know what these people need. So forming very deep industry-linked partnerships, because industry is committed, government is committed, the social sector is committed, philanthropy is committed. So it's a great confluence of collaboration where CSR funding becomes truly catalytic.
Hi. My name is Tarun.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's an amazing session, right? I'm a big fan of both of you, right? Sriram and Priya, I've been hearing you out. You are a real masterclass people, right? Lot to learn from you both. I work with Akshapatra Foundation also. Can I ask one question to everyone over here, with your permission? Right? How many for-profit organizations are sitting in this room today? Very good. So I'm seeing some, right? For profit. Because, somewhere, in this space, social space, for profit has also to be the role. I'm just moving a thing. 80 crore people in our country are getting free ration. Government did its bit to avoid social anarchy. In the COVID, if they were not given food, they will be on the roads. But they are our target segment, and we need to impact their lives. Priya, you talk about million, right? It's a right number, okay? But million is still small, right? If all the people over here, for profit, not for profit, fundraising organizations, if we all join together also, there is so much to be done. So much. 80 crore people is a huge, and this is not an India-centric problem, it is across the world, right? So my question to you is, right, I am untouchable from the NGO industry, right? Because at the moment I go to a CSR and say, I want to work with you, he said, you are not Section 8, please go away. So they send me away. I have figured out a way to work with CSRs also, right? So I become an implementation part for the NGOs because that is the way I have, and I'm working with them. So what is need is to reimagine everything. 25 years, last one of speaker before you, right? They said 25 years, I'm seeing the industry same, right? 1 lakh crores is also not enough. Government is spending much more, right? As a welfare state. There is so much money available. The only need which I want to share with you is what is that we need to change in ourselves to work together. I can't work with you. You have done phenomenal, right? In terms of fundraise, I have a number of 450 crores what you raised. Amazing. How you did it? Amazing. Atul, I know, right? Priya, you have done real bit, right? But nahi hai pura. बहुत जरूरत है, right? How do we work together is something I'm asking you.
Can I respond? So I think just to respond to that, right? So Samita's ambition is to be the smallest organization that can work with the largest number of organizations to create change, right? And that ambition came because of the question that you asked, that the answer lies in collaboration. The answer lies in co-creation. The answer lies in leveraging each one's core strengths and competencies. So to respond back to you, I am very optimistic because in 4 months, we've seen some of India's largest government institutions wanting to proactively not just partner with each other, but partner with the private sector and with financial institutions and the social sector and philanthropic organizations. So I feel like there is a movement building up in India where there are mechanisms to now get many, many organizations to work together that have these complementary ambitions and strengths. So I'm feeling very hopeful and excited. And I fully agree with you that it is a collaborative, co-opted, co-created journey.
Pressure is being put on governments now. So they have to collaborate with the private sector and our sector, social sector.
Hello, my name is Sujit Kumar and I'm from CAF India. So basically I have 2 questions. Since you were talking about the blended finance, which talks about a tri-sector collaboration, Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar. And now you have the social stock exchange that I see that somewhere they overlaps. So how do you see that this is going to change the funding ecosystem, and what is the way forward for the social purpose organization? And my second question is that data shows that there is 0.6 billion gap of funding to meet the SDG goals. So how do you see the role of blended finance and how the commercial sector can pitch in to fill the gap to achieve the SDG goals?
Your question is to Priya?
Yeah.
Would you like to?
So, 2 things, right? One is the inadequate amount of funding that is sort of referenced to and called out. I don't have a radical straight answer to that, but I do believe that particularly with reference to India, we're sitting here. India is not a poor country. India is a rich country, unfortunately, with a lot of poor people. Right? I think one of the things that we need to perhaps reflect and think about is what is our role in this room as non-profits. Of course, there are a few for-profit organizations, but we always ask the question, what is our role here? If we historically look at most big things that have happened in the country, whether it is white revolution, green revolution, the emergence of microfinance, despite some of its challenges, but today the reality is that 25 million people have access to credit, which 20 years back they did not have. Right? These large-scale movements have happened, and the attribution to these have scaled either because government has come in at some point or the private sector or the markets have come in at some point. Right? But the seeds of these were more often than not sowed by non-profit organizations. Right? So as non-profits, the design of how we look at programs that can scale, if we are able to establish an evidence of a prototype that is actually serving the desired impact, and then tweaking the design on how this will happen if the government was to implement it, right? The design element, I feel that the design element has to be questioned. A lot of learnings need to happen, a lot of exchange of what we have all learned from different program interventions, and how do we then fit that remodeled design into let us say an existing government architecture. Fundamentally trying to go in and revamp the entire system over a fortnight is simply not going to work. And I'm sure many of us in this room have done different things. But designing for scale, designing for optimization of the existing available funding is, I think, one of the lower hanging fruits that we should not forget while we continue to answer the question of how do we bring more money into the market, either through the social stock exchanges, or at this point, I also want to call out two other things. Sorry, Priya, just about 30 seconds. One, for example, the private sector. How many of you have heard of Atlassian? I mean, a company called Atlassian, which is global, right? They actually announced a very novel, very creative thing so many years back when they actually founded the company it's called the 1% pledge, or pledge 1%, which essentially means that all for-profit companies pledge 1% of their equity, 1% of their net profits, and 1% of their employee or staff's time towards philanthropic causes. Now, given the number of unicorns that India will produce, and I'm saying it with a certain sense of definitiveness behind it, that India will produce, just introducing a fundraising product in India that says, hey, pledge 1% or 0.5% of your equity, which will be liquidated later towards philanthropic cause, can be an extremely powerful source to unlock and open and make the mouth of the funnel much, much more wider, to answer the question of inadequate funding. I think social stock exchange, time will tell, but I think incentivizing good performance, right? Incentivizing good performing organizations and allowing them to access more and more capital is one of the things that I believe will happen through social stock exchange, because it puts in a certain legitimacy on performance, results orientation, and success in order for them to unlock more and more success. So that way, I think more sort of capital might flow in, and also build a lot of trust and transparency layer into the system, which is often being spoken about at least in our world.
My name is Tarun, and I run a vocational education institute. Coincidentally, I'm an ex-banker. Since you said there's enough money in India, it's a rich country with poor people. If you watch CNBC, they say this, SBI says, come to us startups, any social sector startups or any startups. Just come to us, we have a lot of money. The problem is, we can tweak the model to for-profit, especially in the context of impact assessment. I can name the organizations and the list will be unending. The impact is not there. There's a lot of problem in the social sector. And when we bring in the for-profit model, the impact will be there, the accountability of the money will be there. If you start listing the organizations who are into, I'm not talking about CSR, we're just doing social, they say we're doing social work. The impact is not there. Money is,
So I don't think it's a function of whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit, right? I think it's a function of the organization and their commitment to impact and so I mean, those are sort of fairly broad, generic statements.
So one is impact assessment. I'm saying in terms of fundraising, the crowdfunding model comes up. A lot of people will invest in a for-profit. It'll be easy to raise money. Like you have social exchanges. So, if it's a for-profit startup or a social enterprise, it can be, listed on any platform. They can raise money easily. Otherwise, for not-for-profit, it's very, very difficult to raise money.
I mean, yes and no. So yes and no, but I just want to sort of respond to the other gentleman's question. So 4 months ago, because, our experience coming out of Revive was that, for example, artisans, farmers, street vendors, etc., never get access to credit, right? And I mean, my big learning in the last 3 years is, and this is over, hundreds of thousands of people that we have now spoken with, who said, we don't need your charity, right? We live our lives with dignity. Give us an opportunity and we will succeed. And so starting from there, we actually went to SIDBI, and SIDBI has this entity called CGTMSE. And CGTMSE's job is to provide credit guarantees to banks so they can lend to the poor. Now we found that these schemes were not working. And we asked ourselves this question, that as a really tiny organization, with no prior experience in blended finance or credit guarantees, I mean, how can we influence someone like SIDBI? So we actually are working with the CEO, and in 4 months, we've been able to create a scheme called Nirman, which I said is, so 3 key changes. 1, only focused on new to income and new to credit segments. Never been done before in India. Not been done by funders, not been done by the government. Second, it's the first time that they're saying every borrower who, in addition to getting access to a loan, also gets financial literacy, digital literacy, skilling, etc. So you're delivering much more holistic interventions. And third, impact is not just repayment rates, and to your point, impact is increase in business income, number of jobs created, greater formalization. So for us to believe that an organization like SIDBI, which is 1,000 times our size, right, will actually listen to a nonprofit and not just create a scheme, but announce it and co-create it with multiple other government entities was unthinkable. There is something changing about in the ecosystem, where I believe that whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, the ability to really orchestrate and unlock much greater funding from the private sector, the financial markets, the government sector is very much there. And it's like Khursheed said, I think you need to think out of the box. It's the narrative, it's the data, it's the evidence, it's the using of technology. I mean, to imagine that all of these government institutions will come onto one technology platform, unthinkable. But it's happening now because of the digital public infrastructure that the government has built. Because everyone now sees the impact of sharing data across multiple institutions. And so I think my request is really think out of the box, think creatively. It's not only an NGO CSR conversation. It's not only an NGO donor conversation. It's an NGO and private sector and social sector and financial markets and philanthropic ecosystem, right? It is a true collaborative. And if you reimagine your role in that ecosystem, you'll see the power to unlock significant amount of resources.
Thanks. We'll close the Q&A and you could network with the speakers later. Over to you, Mariam.
Thank you, Aditi. I thank all our panelists and also the audience for this wonderfully interactive session. I think a lot of conversations can be taken offline during the high tea and during the course of the day. I would now request Aditi to felicitate all our panelists as a token of our appreciation and gratitude. I'll just speak a little about the gift that we are giving all our participants, all our speakers. The certificate presented to our speakers marks a small planet forward step. A tiny forest is being created at Devambar Dham, Kashipur, Uttarakhand by the Aforest Institute. Their mission is to bring back the lost forests by creating them. Aditi, may I request you to start with Khursheed and then we'll move on to the others. I'll just announce the names. And Shelly, do we have the bags ready? So we have Khursheed Khurody. Thank you so much, Khursheed. Next, we have Priya Naik. Thank you, Priya. Next, we have Sriram. Thank you, Mr. Sriram. And the next speaker, Mr. Anant Arora. Thank you so much, Anant. Can all the speakers come together for a group photo and then we'll break for tea?